The gunshot that killed her husband echoed through Hannah Ramirez's mind every single day, even 3 years after they buried him in the dusty ground outside Wilcox, Arizona. She stood behind the counter of her general store on that sweltering afternoon in July of 1882, her hands mechanically sorting through bolts of fabric while her eyes remained as hollow as abandoned mine shafts. The smile that had once lit up the entire town like a summer sunrise had vanished completely, replaced by a perpetual expression of resigned endurance that made even the hardest men in town look away in discomfort. Harrison Vaughn had noticed her the moment he rode into Wilcox 3 days earlier, his chestnut mare kicking up dust as he passed the general store. He had been traveling from ranch to ranch, looking for steady work after losing his position up in Colorado when the winter storms had decimated the herd he had been managing. At 26 years old, he had seen his share of hardship, but something about the woman in that store window had stopped him cold. She had been staring out at the street with an expression so achingly sad that it had physically hurt him to witness it, and he had found himself thinking about her constantly ever since. He had asked around town, carefully, not wanting to seem like some kind of troublemaker or opportunist. The bartender at the Silver Spur Saloon had told him the whole tragic story while polishing glasses. Hannah Ramirez had been married to Thomas Ramirez, a good man who worked as a deputy. 3 years back, Thomas had tried to stop a bank robbery and caught a bullet in the chest for his trouble. He had died in Hannah's arms right there in the middle of Main Street, bleeding out while she screamed for help that came too late. She had been 21 years old and suddenly a widow, left to run the general store her father had passed down to her when he died of pneumonia the year before her marriage. The town had rallied around her at first, bringing casseroles and offering words of comfort, but grief had a way of isolating people. Hannah had retreated into herself, becoming a ghost who went through the motions of living without actually participating in life. She opened the store each morning at 7 sharp, closed it at 6 in the evening, and spent her evenings alone in the small house behind the building. She never attended social gatherings anymore, never joined the other women for quilting circles or church socials. The smile that everyone remembered, the one that had made her the belle of Wilcox before her marriage, had simply disappeared. Harrison had taken a job at the Patterson Ranch just outside of town, working as a ranch hand for decent wages and a place to sleep in the bunkhouse. But he found himself riding into Wilcox whenever he had a free afternoon, always finding some excuse to stop by the general store. He needed tobacco, or a new shirt, or some salve for a rope burn. Hannah served him with quiet efficiency, never meeting his eyes for more than a second, her voice flat and professional as she tallied up his purchases. On his 4th visit, Harrison decided to change tactics. He walked into the store on a Thursday afternoon when business was slow, the heat outside making even the lizards seek shade. Hannah stood behind the counter, fanning herself with a folded newspaper, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. She looked up when the bell above the door chimed, and her expression shifted into that neutral mask of polite attention. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying no inflection whatsoever. "What can I help you find today?" Harrison removed his hat and held it in his hands, suddenly feeling like a nervous schoolboy despite all his years working cattle and breaking horses. "Afternoon, madam. I was wondering if you might have any of those peppermint sticks. The fellows at the ranch have been talking about the ones they used to get here as kids." Hannah nodded once and moved to a glass jar on the shelf behind her. She pulled out a handful of the red and white striped candies and placed them on the counter. 15 cents for 6, she stated. He fished the coins from his pocket and placed them on the counter, but instead of taking his candy and leaving, he stayed put. Hannah's eyes flickered up to his face, a question forming in her gaze. "I heard you make the best apple pie in the territory," Harrison said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess himself. "The cook at the ranch was talking about it last night. Said your pies used to win the ribbon at every county fair." For just a moment, something shifted in Hannah's expression. Pain flashed across her features, quickly suppressed but not before Harrison saw it. "I do not bake pies anymore," she said quietly. "Is there anything else you need?" He should have left it alone. Any sensible man would have taken his candy and walked out. But Harrison had never been accused of being overly sensible, and something about this woman made him want to push past those walls she had built around herself. "That is a real shame," he said softly. "I bet those pies brought a lot of joy to people." Hannah's hands gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "Joy is not something I have much experience with these days, Mr. Vaughn. Now, if you will excuse me, I have inventory to complete." She knew his name. That small detail gave him an unreasonable amount of hope as he collected his peppermints and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the handle and turned back. "My mama always used to say that sometimes the best way to heal a hurt is to bring joy to someone else. Maybe those pies could still serve a purpose, madam." He did not wait for a response, stepping out into the blazing Arizona heat and settling his hat back on his head. As he untied his mare from the hitching post, he glanced back through the window. Hannah stood frozen behind the counter, staring down at her hands with an expression he could not quite read. That night, lying in his bunk while the other ranch hands snored around him, Harrison stared at the ceiling and wondered what the hell he was doing. He had known loss himself. His parents had died in a fire when he was 15, leaving him and his younger sister orphans. His sister had been taken in by their aunt in Kansas, but Harrison had been too old, too much of a burden, so he had struck out on his own. He had learned to cowboy through sheer necessity, working for his keep and sleeping in barns until he had built up enough skill and reputation to land proper jobs. He understood what it meant to lose everything and have to rebuild from ashes. But he had never lost a spouse, never had someone torn from him in a moment of violence. He could not truly understand Hannah's pain, and maybe he had no business trying to insert himself into her life. Yet something kept pulling him back to that store, back to those sad eyes that haunted his dreams. The next Sunday, Harrison rode into town early, before church services let out. He had spent the previous day helping one of the ranch wives pick apples from the orchard on the property, and he had traded some of his wages for a bushel of the best ones. They sat in a crate tied to his saddle now, their red and gold skins gleaming in the morning sun. He dismounted in front of Hannah's store and stood there for a long moment, questioning his sanity. Then he grabbed the crate and walked around to the back of the building, where he knew Hannah's small house sat. The yard was neat but sparse, with a few struggling flowers in pots by the door that looked like they could use more water. He knocked firmly, his heart hammering in his chest. It took a full minute before the door opened. Hannah stood there in a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that made his breath catch. Shock registered on her face when she saw him standing there with a crate of apples. "Mr. Vaughn, what on earth are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp with confusion and something that might have been alarm. "I brought you these," he said, holding out the crate. "Fresh picked yesterday. Thought maybe you might want to make a pie or two. You could sell them in the store if you wanted, or give them away, or just make them for yourself. But these are too good to waste, and I heard you were the person who could do them justice." Hannah stared at the apples, then at him, then back at the apples. "I told you I do not bake anymore." "I know what you told me," Harrison said gently. "But I also know that sometimes we stop doing things that brought us joy because we think we do not deserve joy anymore. And that is just not true, madam. Your husband died, and that is the worst kind of tragedy. But you are still here. You are still breathing and walking around, and that means you still get to have moments of happiness. That does not mean you loved him any less." Her eyes filled with tears so suddenly it startled them both. She turned her face away, one hand coming up to cover her mouth. "You do not understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was supposed to be there. I was supposed to bring him lunch that day, but I was busy with a customer and I was running late. If I had been there on time, if I had walked up to the bank when I was supposed to, maybe he would have seen me and stayed outside to talk to me instead of going in right when those men were coming out. Maybe that 1 minute difference would have meant he lived instead of died." The guilt in her voice was like a physical thing, crushing and terrible. Harrison set the crate down carefully on the porch and took a step closer, though he did not touch her. "And maybe you would have caught that bullet instead," he said quietly. "Or maybe both of you would have died. You cannot carry that weight, Hannah. You cannot blame yourself for every moment and decision that led to that day. Bad men made bad choices, and your husband was a hero who tried to stop them. That is what happened, not anything you did or did not do." She was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face as her shoulders shook. Harrison felt helpless, wanting desperately to comfort her but knowing he had no right to hold her, to offer that kind of intimacy. So he just stood there, his hat in his hands, waiting while she released what looked like 3 years of pent-up grief. Eventually, Hannah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice raw. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." "No, I do not," Harrison agreed. "But that does not mean I cannot want to help. Sometimes we do things just because they are the right thing to do, not because we expect anything in return." He gestured to the apples. "These will go bad if someone does not use them soon. I will leave them here, and you can do whatever you want with them. Throw them away if that is what you need, but I hope maybe you will remember what it felt like to create something good." He picked up his hat, settled it on his head, and walked back around the building to where his horse waited. His hands were shaking slightly as he mounted up, adrenaline and emotion making his movements less smooth than usual. He did not look back as he rode away, heading back to the ranch where he had a full day of work waiting. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples over the desert landscape, Hannah stood in her kitchen staring at the crate of apples sitting on her table. She had carried them inside after Harrison left, unable to simply abandon them on her porch. They really were beautiful apples, perfect for baking. Her fingers itched with muscle memory, remembering the process of peeling and slicing, mixing butter and flour and sugar into the flaky crust her mother had taught her to make when she was just a girl. Thomas had loved her pies. He had always eaten 2 slices, claiming he needed the energy for his work but really just loving the taste. After he died, she had tried to bake once, about 6 months into her widowhood, thinking maybe it would help. But when she pulled that pie from the oven and smelled that familiar cinnamon apple scent, she had broken down completely. She had thrown the entire thing away and vowed never to put herself through that torture again. But standing there now, looking at those apples Harrison Vaughn had brought her, she felt something stirring inside her chest. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there. A tiny flicker of something that might have been curiosity, or maybe even the smallest hint of desire to do something other than merely exist. She picked up an apple and turned it over in her hands, feeling its weight and firmness. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled out her mother's old recipe box and found the card with the apple pie recipe written in faded ink. Her hands moved almost of their own accord, gathering ingredients, lighting the stove, rolling out dough on the counter. 3 hours later, 2 golden pies sat cooling on her kitchen windowsill, filling her small house with a scent that brought back 1,000 memories. Hannah sat at her kitchen table, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, staring at those pies like they were dangerous things. But they were also beautiful, perfectly browned and obviously delicious. She had done that. She had created something good, just like Harrison had said. The next morning, Hannah opened her store as usual, but this time she placed one of the pies on the counter with a sign that read, "Free slices." By noon, half the town had stopped by, drawn by the word spreading through Wilcox like wildfire. Hannah Ramirez had baked again. Old-timers who remembered her legendary desserts came in with tears in their eyes, thanking her for the slice they had enjoyed. Young mothers brought their children to try a piece of the pie they had only heard about. The store was busier than it had been in months, and through it all, Hannah felt something unfamiliar happening inside her. She was not exactly happy, not yet, but there was a warmth starting to spread through the cold places in her chest. She caught herself almost smiling when old Mr. Henderson declared it was even better than he remembered. Almost, but not quite. The smile still would not fully form, the muscles seeming to have forgotten how. She saved 3 slices from the pie, wrapping them carefully in paper. That evening, after she closed the store, she packed them into a basket and made a decision that surprised her. She saddled the horse she kept in the small stable behind her house, a gentle mare named Daisy who rarely got ridden anymore, and headed out toward the Patterson ranch. The sun was setting as she arrived, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Several ranch hands were finishing up their work for the day, and they looked surprised to see her riding up. One of them, a young man with red hair and a friendly face, approached her. "Evening, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Are you looking for someone?" "Harrison Vaughn," Hannah replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Is he here?" The young man grinned and pointed toward the barn. "Just finished putting the horses up for the night. I will go get him for you." Hannah dismounted and waited, holding the basket in front of her like a shield. A few minutes later, Harrison emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. When he saw her standing there, he stopped so suddenly he almost tripped over his own feet. "Hannah," he said, then caught himself. "I mean, Mrs. Ramirez, is everything all right?" She walked toward him, her heart pounding. When she was close enough, she held out the basket. "I baked," she said simply, "and I brought you some, to say thank you for the apples and for what you said." Harrison took the basket with hands that were suddenly unsteady. He pulled back the cloth covering and saw the pie slices, still looking fresh and perfect. When he looked back up at her, his eyes were bright with emotion. "You did not have to do this." "I know," Hannah said, "but I wanted to. You were right about creating something good. It helped." "Not completely, but more than I expected. So thank you." They stood there in the fading light, 2 broken people finding an unexpected connection. Harrison cleared his throat. "Would you like to sit for a while? There are some chairs on the bunkhouse porch. I could make coffee." Hannah knew she should decline, should maintain the proper distance that society expected from a widow. But something in her was tired of always doing what was expected, always being alone with her grief. "Coffee would be nice," she heard herself say. They sat on the porch as stars began to appear overhead, drinking bitter coffee from tin cups and talking about small things at first. The weather, the ranch, the store. But gradually, as the night deepened and the other ranch hands retreated to the bunkhouse or the main house, their conversation grew more personal. Harrison told her about losing his parents, about raising himself in the harsh world of ranch work and cattle drives. He spoke of the loneliness that came from never having a real home, always moving from job to job, never putting down roots. His voice was low and honest, without any self-pity, just stating facts. Hannah found herself opening up in return, telling him about the early days of her marriage, how happy she had been. How Thomas had been her childhood sweetheart, the only man she had ever loved. She told him about running the store alone, about the crushing weight of grief that made every day feel like walking through deep water. She told him about the guilt that ate at her constantly, the what-ifs that plagued her sleep. "I stopped smiling," she said at one point, the words coming out soft and sad. "I used to smile all the time. People used to say I had the kind of smile that could light up a room, but after Thomas died, it just went away. I would try sometimes in the mirror just to see if I remembered how. But it always felt wrong, like I was lying, like I did not deserve to smile when he was dead." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Maybe that is your mission now, finding that smile again. Not because you have to, but because somewhere inside you there is still joy waiting to be let out. And maybe I could help with that, if you would let me." Hannah turned to look at him in the darkness, trying to see his face clearly. "Why would you want to do that? Why would you take on someone else's pain?" "Because maybe helping you would help me too," Harrison admitted. "I have been drifting for a long time, never connecting with anyone or anything, always keeping myself separate because it seemed safer. But seeing you, talking to you, it makes me think maybe there is more to life than just getting through each day. Maybe we could both find something better if we did it together." It was not a declaration of love or even courtship, not exactly. It was something more tentative, more honest. An acknowledgement that they were both wounded and maybe they could help each other heal. Hannah felt tears prickling her eyes again, but these were different from the ones she had shed in the past 3 years. These carried a hint of hope mixed in with the sorrow. "I do not know if I can," she whispered. "I do not know if I am ready to move forward." "Then we will take it slow," Harrison said. "No pressure, no expectations, just two people trying to find their way. What do you say?" Hannah looked up at the stars overhead, the same stars that had been shining the night Thomas died, the same stars that would keep shining long after she was gone. Life kept moving forward whether she was ready or not. Maybe it was time to stop resisting and start living again, even if it scared her. "All right," she said softly. "We can try." Over the following weeks, Harrison made good on his promise to take things slow. He rode into town every Sunday after church, when the store was closed, and he would help Hannah with tasks around her property. He fixed the fence in her yard that had been leaning for 2 years. He repaired the roof on her stable where shingles had blown off in a storm. He weeded her garden and helped her plant vegetables that might actually have a chance of growing in the harsh Arizona soil. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and learning about each other. Harrison had a dry sense of humor that occasionally caught Hannah off guard, making her breath catch in something that wanted to be a laugh but had not quite figured out how. He was patient and kind, never pushing her to feel more than she was ready to feel, never expecting anything from her except the pleasure of her company. Hannah found herself looking forward to Sundays with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. She would catch herself thinking about things she wanted to tell Harrison, saving up observations and thoughts to share with him. When she heard his horse approaching, her heart would start to beat faster, and she would have to take a moment to calm herself before going to greet him. The town noticed, of course. In a place as small as Wilcox, nothing stayed secret for long. Women whispered to each other at the dry goods store, speculating about whether Hannah was finally ready to move on. Some approved, thinking it was healthy for her to find companionship again. Others thought 3 years was too soon, that she should honor Thomas's memory with a longer mourning period. Hannah tried not to listen to the gossip, but it was impossible to ignore completely. One afternoon in late August, Mrs. Patterson, the ranch owner's wife, came into the store. She was a kind woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She browsed for a while, selecting thread and some fabric, before approaching the counter where Hannah stood. "My husband tells me Harrison Vaughn has been spending his Sundays in town, Mrs. Patterson said conversationally as Hannah tallied her purchases. "Says he seems happier than when he first arrived, more settled." Hannah kept her eyes on the numbers she was writing, her cheeks warming. "He has been helping me with some repairs around my property. It is kind of him." "Harrison is a good man," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Hardworking, honest, respectful, the kind of man who would treat a woman right." She paused, then added gently, "The kind of man who deserves a chance if you are ready to give one." Hannah finally looked up, meeting the older woman's eyes. "I am not sure I will ever be completely ready. The guilt does not just go away." Mrs. Patterson reached across the counter and patted Hannah's hand. "Guilt is a heavy burden, dear, but it is not one you have to carry forever. Thomas would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone and unhappy. He loved you, which means he would want you to live fully, even if that meant eventually finding love again." The words settled into Hannah's chest, both comforting and challenging. After Mrs. Patterson left, Hannah stood behind the counter thinking about what it meant to truly live again. Was she doing that? Or was she just going through motions with slightly less emptiness than before? That Sunday, when Harrison arrived, Hannah had made a decision. She had packed a picnic basket with fried chicken, fresh bread, and 2 slices of apple pie. When he dismounted and started toward the stable to get his tools, she stopped him. "I thought maybe we could do something different today," she said, her voice nervous. "There is a place by the creek about a mile from here. It is pretty with some shade trees. I thought maybe we could have a picnic." Harrison's face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "I would like that very much." They rode out together, Hannah on Daisy and Harrison on his mare. The creek was not much, just a small stream that somehow managed to keep flowing even in the summer heat, but it was fed by an underground spring and created a small oasis of green in the brown landscape. Hannah had not been there since before Thomas died. They had come here sometimes in the early days of their marriage, spreading a blanket under the cottonwood trees and spending lazy afternoons together. She felt the memories pressing in as they dismounted, and she pulled out the old quilt she had brought. But Harrison seemed to sense her emotional state, and he started talking about a funny incident at the ranch involving a stubborn bull and a prideful ranch hand. His story was engaging enough to pull her attention away from the ghosts of the past, and by the time they sat down to eat, she felt more present in the moment. The food was simple but good, and Harrison praised every bite like it was a feast. They ate slowly, the conversation flowing easily between them. Harrison told her about his dreams of maybe saving enough money to buy a small piece of land someday, nothing grand, just enough for a modest house and a few horses. Hannah talked about how she had always imagined expanding the store, maybe carrying more books and fancy goods, making it a real gathering place for the community. "You could still do that," Harrison said, watching her face. "Nothing is stopping you." "Money is stopping me," Hannah replied with a practical shrug. "And energy, and motivation. Running the store as it is takes everything I have most days." Harrison was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "What if you had help, a partner who could share the load?" Hannah's breath caught. She knew what he was really asking, even if he was being subtle about it. "Harrison, I do not know if I can be what you might want me to be. I am still broken inside. I do not know if I can fix that." He shifted closer to her on the blanket, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the shade. I am not asking you to be fixed. I am just asking if maybe you might want to try building something new. Not to replace what you lost, but to create something different. Something that could be good in its own way. Hannah looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time. She saw the hope in his eyes, but also the understanding. He was not trying to take Thomas's place or make her forget her first love. He was offering something entirely separate, a new chapter that could exist alongside her memories. I am afraid, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I let myself care for you and then something happens? What if I lose you too? I do not think I could survive that again. Harrison reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not move, he took her hand in his calloused fingers warm and steady. I cannot promise nothing bad will ever happen. Life does not work that way. But I can promise I will do everything in my power to stick around. I am careful and smart, and I do not take unnecessary risks. And maybe the possibility of something good is worth the risk of getting hurt again. Hannah stared down at their joined hands, her mind spinning. Part of her wanted to pull away, to retreat back into the safety of her isolation. But another part, a part that had been dormant for 3 long years, was waking up. It whispered that maybe Harrison was right. Maybe living meant risking pain, but it also meant opening yourself to joy. I do not know how to do this, she said finally. I do not remember how to court or be courted. I do not know the steps anymore. Harrison squeezed her hand gently. Then we will make it up as we go. There are no rules that say it has to be done a certain way. We will figure it out together. They sat there by the creek for hours, talking and sharing silences that felt comfortable rather than awkward. At one point, Harrison picked a wildflower growing near the water's edge and handed it to her with a shy smile that made him look years younger. Hannah took it, turning the small purple blossom over in her fingers, and felt something shift in her chest. It was a small gesture, simple and sweet, and it touched her more deeply than any grand romantic declaration could have. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, they packed up the picnic and prepared to ride back. Before mounting her horse, Hannah turned to Harrison and said, "Thank you, for today, for all of it." Harrison tipped his hat to her, his eyes warm. "The pleasure was all mine, Hannah." She noticed he had dropped the formal Mrs. Ramirez, and she found she did not mind at all. The courting that followed was unconventional by any standard, but it worked for them. Harrison continued his Sunday visits, but now they were less about chores and more about spending time together. They would take walks through town in the early evening when the heat had faded, Harrison offering his arm and Hannah resting her hand in the crook of his elbow. They attended a church social together in September, and though Hannah felt self-conscious about the stares and whispers, Harrison's steady presence beside her made it bearable. The town's opinion began to shift as people saw them together. Even those who had initially disapproved had to admit they seemed good for each other. Harrison treated Hannah with obvious respect and affection, and Hannah, while still quiet and reserved, seemed more present than she had in years. Color had returned to her cheeks, and there was a new alertness in her eyes, like she was actually seeing the world around her instead of just moving through it. In October, Harrison was promoted to foreman at the Patterson Ranch, a testament to his skill and work ethic. The position came with better pay and a small cabin on the property, giving him his own space instead of sharing the bunkhouse. The first thing he did was invite Hannah to see it, wanting her opinion on how he should arrange the sparse furniture. Hannah rode out on a crisp autumn afternoon, the sky a brilliant blue overhead. The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen area, but it had good bones and windows that let in plenty of light. Harrison watched nervously as she walked through the space, running her hands along the walls and peering out the windows. "It has potential," she said finally. "Some curtains would help, and maybe a rug for the main room. You could build some shelves along that wall for books and personal items." Harrison relaxed visibly. "Would you help me pick out the fabric and such? I do not have much experience making a place feel like home." Hannah smiled, and though it was small and fleeting, it was there. A real smile, the first Harrison had seen on her face. It transformed her features, bringing light to her eyes and softness to her expression. Harrison felt his heart literally skip a beat at the sight of it. "Did you just smile?" he asked softly, moving closer to her. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in surprise. "I think I did," she whispered, sounding shocked. "I did not even realize until you said something." Harrison wanted to pull her into his arms, to hold her and tell her how beautiful she looked when she smiled. But he held himself back, not wanting to push too fast. "It looked good on you," he said instead. "Natural." Hannah felt tears prickling her eyes, but for once they were not entirely sad tears. Something was happening inside her, something she had thought was gone forever. The ice around her heart was cracking, letting warmth seep through. She thought of Thomas, of how much she had loved him, and she sent up a silent prayer that he would understand, that he would forgive her for finding a way forward. As if reading her thoughts, Harrison said quietly, "He would be glad, you know, that you are finding happiness again." "How can you be sure?" Hannah asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Because he loved you," Harrison replied simply. "And real love wants the beloved to be happy, even if you cannot be the one to give them that happiness anymore." Hannah nodded, wiping at her eyes. They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing how to make the cabin more livable. And Hannah found herself imagining what it might be like to spend time there, to cook meals in that small kitchen, to sit by the fire on cold winter nights. The images came unbidden, and they did not feel wrong the way she thought they would. November brought cooler weather and the anticipation of Thanksgiving. Mrs. Patterson invited both Harrison and Hannah to join the ranch family for the holiday meal, and Hannah accepted, feeling ready to participate in community celebrations again. She baked 3 pies for the occasion, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of baking with a sense of peace she had not felt in years. The Thanksgiving dinner was a lively affair, with ranch hands and neighboring families crowding around the long tables set up in the Pattersons' large dining room. Hannah sat beside Harrison, and she found herself laughing at the stories being told around her, really laughing from deep in her belly until tears ran down her face. Harrison watched her with such open adoration that several people noticed and smiled knowingly. After the meal, as people lingered over coffee and dessert, Harrison pulled Hannah aside. They walked out onto the porch where the cool evening air was refreshing after the crowded warmth inside. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "Hannah, I need to tell you something," Harrison said, his voice serious. "And I want you to know there is no pressure here. I am not asking for anything, just stating a fact." Hannah's heart began to pound. She turned to face him, searching his face in the dim light spilling from the windows. Harrison took a deep breath. "I love you. I have loved you for months now, probably since the first time I saw you standing in that store window looking so heartbreakingly sad. I know this might be too soon, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. You have brought meaning back into my life, given me a purpose beyond just existing. Whatever happens from here, I want you to know that." Hannah felt like she could not breathe. Love. The word echoed in her mind, bringing with it a rush of conflicting emotions. She had loved Thomas with everything in her, and when he died, She thought that part of her had died too. But standing here now, looking at Harrison's honest face and feeling the way her heart raced at his nearness, she realized that love had not died. It had just been sleeping, waiting for someone to wake it up. "I do not know if what I feel is love yet," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But I know that when I am with you, I feel more alive than I have in 3 years. I know that I look forward to seeing you, that I think about you when you are not around. I know that you make me want to try, to push past the fear and grief and find something good. If that is not love yet, I think it might be heading that way." Harrison's face broke into a wide smile, and he reached out to cup her cheek gently. "That is more than enough for me. We have time, Hannah. All the time we need." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and letting herself feel the warmth of his hand against her skin. When she opened them again, she saw him watching her with such tenderness it made her breath catch. Almost without thinking, she rose up on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his lips. It was brief and chaste, nothing like the passionate kisses she had shared with Thomas. But it was sweet and full of promise, a first step into a new kind of love. When she pulled back, Harrison was staring at her with wonder in his eyes. "Hannah," he breathed, and then he was kissing her again, deeper this time but still gentle, treating her like something precious and fragile. Hannah felt heat spreading through her body, waking up parts of her that had been numb for so long. She clutched at his shirt, anchoring herself to him as the world spun around her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Hannah felt more present in her own body than she had in years. "I think I might be falling in love with you," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and exhilarating. Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "I will catch you," he promised. "I will always catch you." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms under the vast Arizona sky. Inside the house, people were singing hymns and old folk songs, their voices carrying on the cool night air. Hannah felt something she had not felt in 3 years. She felt hopeful. As winter settled over Wilcox, Harrison and Hannah's relationship deepened. They were officially courting now, with Harrison calling on her properly at her home and Hannah accepting invitations to dances and social events with him as her escort. The whole town watched their romance bloom with varying degrees of approval and interest, but Hannah found she cared less and less what other people thought. Christmas brought a special gift from Harrison. He arrived at her door on Christmas Eve carrying a small wooden box he had carved himself. Inside, nestled on a bed of fabric, was a delicate silver locket. When Hannah opened it, she found space for 2 photographs. "I know you will always carry Thomas in your heart," Harrison said softly. "I am not trying to replace him or make you forget. But I thought maybe you could put his picture on one side, so he is always with you. And maybe, if you wanted, there could be room for someone else on the other side eventually." Hannah's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the locket. It was the most thoughtful, understanding gift anyone could have given her. It acknowledged her past while leaving room for her future. She threw her arms around Harrison's neck, holding him tight as emotion overwhelmed her. "It is perfect," she whispered against his shoulder. "You are perfect." "Far from it," Harrison chuckled, but he held her close, stroking her hair gently. "But I am yours if you will have me." Hannah pulled back to look at him, and in that moment she knew. The feeling that had been growing in her chest for months crystallized into certainty. She loved this man. It was different from how she had loved Thomas, less innocent perhaps, tempered by loss and grief and hard-won wisdom, but it was real and deep and worth fighting for. "I love you," she said, the words feeling both strange and right on her tongue. "I really, truly love you, Harrison Vaughn." Harrison's face transformed with joy. He kissed her soundly, then again and again, until they were both laughing breathlessly. "I love you too," he said between kisses. "So damned much." They spent Christmas Day together, exchanging small gifts and cooking a meal in Hannah's kitchen. Harrison had a tentative quality to his movements, as if he still could not quite believe this was real. Hannah found herself touching him frequently, his hand, his arm, his face, reassuring both of them that this was happening. In the new year of 1883, Harrison began talking more seriously about the future. He had been saving money steadily, and he had his eye on a piece of land just outside town. It was not much, maybe 40 acres, but it had good grazing and a natural spring. With his salary as foreman and Hannah's income from the store, they could make a good life together. "I am asking you to marry me," Harrison said one cold January evening as they sat by the fire in her small parlor. "Not right away if you are not ready, but eventually. I want to build a life with you, Hannah. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and go to sleep every night knowing you are safe and loved. I want to help you run the store and expand it the way you have always dreamed. I want to build a home where we can make new memories while honoring the old ones. What do you say?" Hannah looked at this man who had come into her life and slowly, patiently, helped her find her way back to living. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned that had been cut so tragically short. She would always love him, always carry him in her heart, but Thomas was gone and she was still here. She deserved to live fully, to love again, to build a future. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I will marry you, Harrison." Harrison whooped with joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Hannah felt the last pieces of ice around her heart melt away. She was ready. Ready to move forward, ready to love again, ready to smile. And she did smile, a full, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. Harrison stared at her like she had given him the sun and moon. "There it is," he said softly, touching her cheek. "That smile I have been trying to bring back. It was worth every moment." They decided on a spring wedding, giving themselves time to prepare and the town time to adjust to the idea. Hannah threw herself into planning with an energy that surprised everyone, including herself. She ordered fabric for a new dress, not white because she was a widow, but a beautiful deep blue that matched her eyes. She helped Harrison with the purchase of the land, signing the papers with a sense of excitement about their future. The wedding took place in April of 1883, in the small church where Hannah had married Thomas 5 years earlier. This time, instead of sadness, she felt joy mixed with a bittersweet acknowledgement of the past. Mrs. Patterson stood up with her, and one of Harrison's fellow ranch hands served as his best man. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Harrison kissed her with such tender passion that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The reception was held at the Patterson Ranch, with the whole town turning out to celebrate. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Hannah found herself in the center of it all, smiling and laughing, accepting congratulations and well wishes. At one point, she caught sight of herself in a window and barely recognized the woman looking back. This woman was alive, vibrant, full of hope. The transformation was remarkable. As the party wound down and evening approached, Harrison pulled Hannah aside. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Vaughn?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. Hannah felt a flutter of nerves mixed with anticipation. They had decided to live in Harrison's cabin at first, with plans to build a larger house on their new land over the coming year. "I am ready," she said, and she meant it. They rode to the cabin under a sky painted pink and gold with sunset. Harrison helped her down from her horse and then, to her surprise, scooped her up in his arms to carry her over the threshold. Hannah laughed, the sound free and uninhibited as he kicked the door closed behind them. He set her down gently in the main room, which she had helped him furnish over the past months. It looked cozy and welcoming in the lamplight, with the curtains she had sewn hanging in the windows and the rug she had chosen warming the floor. This was her home now. Their home. Harrison took her hands in his expression serious. "I want you to know that we can take this as slow as you need. I am not expecting anything tonight except to hold you and wake up beside you. Whatever you are comfortable with is what we will do." Hannah felt a wave of love for this patient, understanding man. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I am your wife now, and I want to be your wife in every way. I am not afraid anymore, Harrison. I am ready to fully live again." What followed was tender and sweet, two people learning each other and creating something new together. Hannah felt cherished and safe in Harrison's arms, able to be vulnerable in a way she had not been since losing Thomas. When they finally fell asleep, tangled together in the small bed, Hannah felt a peace she had not known in 3 years. The months that followed were busy and productive. They ran the store together, with Harrison handling the heavy lifting and inventory, while Hannah managed the accounts and customer service. They broke ground on their new house in May, hiring local workers to help with the construction. The design was simple but spacious, with a large kitchen where Hannah could bake to her heart's content, and a porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. Hannah found herself smiling frequently now, the expression coming naturally instead of feeling forced. People in town commented on the change in her, how she seemed to glow with happiness. The tragic widow who had haunted Wilcox for 3 years had transformed into a woman fully engaged with life. In August, Hannah began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited a few weeks to be sure before telling Harrison, wanting to give him the news in a special way. She baked his favorite pie and invited him home early from work one day, claiming she had a surprise for him. Harrison arrived to find the table set with their best dishes and the pie sitting in the center, its crust perfectly golden. He looked at Hannah with confused delight. "What is all this for? Did I forget an anniversary?" Hannah shook her head, unable to contain her smile. "No, you did not forget anything. I just have some news I wanted to share." She took his hands and placed them on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby." Harrison's eyes went wide with shock, then filled with tears. "A baby? Really? Are you sure?" "I am sure," Hannah confirmed, laughing at his expression. "You are going to be a father, Harrison." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she had to protest that he was squeezing her. Sorry, he said, loosening his grip but not letting go. "I just cannot believe it. We are going to be parents." Hannah felt joy bubbling up inside her, pure and uncomplicated. She was going to be a mother. She was going to bring new life into this world, a child who would be a product of the love she and Harrison shared. It felt like the final piece of her healing, the ultimate proof that she had truly moved forward into a new and beautiful chapter of her life. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and winter. Their new house was completed in November, and they moved in just before Thanksgiving, hosting a dinner for their friends and neighbors to celebrate both their new home and the coming baby. Harrison was attentive and protective, constantly worrying about Hannah overdoing it, while Hannah felt healthier and happier than she had in years. In March of 1884, Hannah went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Harrison paced outside the bedroom where the midwife and Mrs. Patterson attended Hannah, nearly wearing a hole in the floor. Every cry of pain from his wife tore at him, making him feel helpless and desperate, Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, he heard a different sound. The thin, angry wail of a newborn. Harrison burst into the room without waiting for permission, his eyes frantically seeking Hannah. She lay propped up against the pillows, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly, her voice tired but full of love. Harrison approached slowly, almost reverently. When he looked down at the baby's face, he felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. The baby had dark hair and was red-faced from crying, his tiny fists waving in the air. He was perfect. "A son," Harrison breathed, reaching out to touch one of those small hands. The baby's fingers immediately curled around his much larger finger, gripping with surprising strength. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Hannah asked, watching Harrison's face with a tender expression. Harrison looked at her, then back at the baby. "What about Henry Thomas Vaughn?" He said the middle name carefully, watching Hannah's reaction. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. Naming their son after Thomas felt right, like honoring the past while celebrating the future. "Henry Thomas Vaughn," she repeated. "It is perfect." Baby Henry proved to be a happy child, quick to smile and relatively easy to care for. Hannah took to motherhood naturally, her maternal instincts strong despite her initial nervousness. Harrison was a devoted father, always ready to walk the floor with Henry when he was fussy or change diapers without complaint. The store continued to thrive, with Hannah and Harrison working as a seamless team to manage both their business and their growing family. As Henry grew from baby to toddler, Hannah often found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She would look at her son playing on the floor while Harrison carved him wooden toys, and she would feel overwhelmed with gratitude. There was a photograph of Thomas in the locket Harrison had given her, which she wore every day. But on the other side was now a photograph of Harrison, taken just before their wedding. The two men who had loved her, side by side, representing different chapters of her life. She never forgot Thomas. She visited his grave regularly, bringing flowers and telling him about Henry and the life she had built. She liked to think he was watching over them, glad that she had found happiness again. The grief had not disappeared completely, it never would, but it had transformed into something softer. A sweet sadness mixed with fond memories, rather than the crushing despair that had once consumed her. When Henry was 2 years old, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time Harrison was less shocked and more delighted, immediately beginning to plan how they would expand the house to accommodate another child. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in September of 1886, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Hope Catherine Vaughn. Hope was a beautiful baby with her mother's features and her father's green eyes. Henry was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. The house rang with laughter and occasional arguments as Henry asserted his older brother's status, and Hope grew from infant to curious toddler. The years passed in a blur of birthdays and holidays, scraped knees and childhood illnesses, expansion of the store and improvement of their land. Harrison proved to be as good a businessman as he was a rancher and father, and their modest prosperity grew into genuine success. They became pillars of the Wilcox community, known for their generosity and kindness. When Hannah turned 30 in 1890, Harrison threw her a surprise party that included what seemed like half the town. As she looked around at the crowd of friends and neighbors, her children playing with other kids in the yard, her husband beaming at her from across the room, Hannah felt her smile stretching wide across her face. This smile, the one that Harrison had made it his mission to bring back, now came easily and often. It had taken time and patience and love, but she had healed. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to truly live again. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep in their beds, Harrison and Hannah sat on their porch watching the stars. Hannah leaned against her husband's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist, and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "About how grateful I am," Hannah replied. "For you, for our children, for this life we have built. There was a time when I thought I would never feel happy again, but you did not give up on me. You saw something in me worth saving, even when I could not see it myself." Harrison tightened his embrace. "You saved yourself, Hannah. I just gave you a reason to try. You did all the hard work." Hannah turned to look up at him, this man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. "We saved each other," she said firmly, "and we built something beautiful together." Harrison kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 8 years of shared history and the promise of many more to come. When they pulled apart, Hannah was smiling that radiant smile that still made Harrison's heart skip a beat. "I love you," she said, the words as true and powerful as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too," Harrison replied. "Always and forever." As the years continued to unfold, Harrison and Hannah's family grew and flourished alongside the town of Wilcox itself. The general store became known throughout the region for its fair prices and quality goods, drawing customers from neighboring towns and distant ranches. Hannah's pies remained legendary, and she often donated them to church functions and community gatherings, bringing joy to everyone who tasted them. Henry grew into a responsible young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's compassion. By the time he was 16, he was managing much of the day-to-day operations of the store, showing a natural aptitude for business that made both his parents proud. Hope, meanwhile, proved to be artistic and spirited, painting pictures of the desert landscape and writing poetry that captured the beauty and harshness of Arizona life. In 1895, when Hannah was 35 and Harrison 39, they welcomed an unexpected third child, a son they named Samuel. His arrival brought renewed energy to the household, with Henry and Hope doting on their baby brother with enthusiastic affection. Harrison joked that they were starting all over again, but the joy in his eyes made it clear he would not have it any other way. The turn of the century brought changes to Wilcox and the surrounding territory. The railroad had come through years earlier, connecting them more closely to the rest of the nation. Arizona was on the path to statehood, and the wild frontier days were slowly giving way to more settled civilization. The violence and lawlessness that had characterized the region in earlier decades had largely faded, though the spirit of independence and resilience remained strong. Through all these changes, Harrison and Hannah remained constants in each other's lives and in their community. They had weathered difficulties together, droughts that threatened their ranch land, illnesses that swept through the town, and the normal challenges that came with running a business and raising a family. But their love had only deepened over the years, maturing into something rock-solid and enduring. On their 20th anniversary in 1903, Harrison surprised Hannah with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time either of them had traveled so far from Arizona, and Hannah was both nervous and excited about seeing the big city. They left the children in the capable hands of Henry, who was now 21 and more than able to manage both the store and his younger siblings. The trip was revelatory for both of them. They saw the ocean for the first time, standing on the beach with their hands clasped and watching waves crash against the shore. They attended the opera, ate at fancy restaurants, and stayed in a hotel that was more luxurious than anything they had experienced. But what struck them most was how much they simply enjoyed being together, away from responsibilities and the familiar rhythms of their daily life. On their last night in San Francisco, as they walked along the waterfront at sunset, Harrison stopped and turned to face Hannah. The light painted her face in shades of gold and pink, highlighting the lines that had formed around her eyes and mouth, proof of a life fully lived and frequently smiled. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Choosing me, I mean, building this life instead of holding on to your grief forever." Hannah looked at him with surprise and then understanding. Even after 20 years, he still sometimes doubted, still worried that he was somehow not enough compared to her first love. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, making him look directly into her eyes. "Harrison Vaughn, you listen to me. Choosing you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me back my life. You brought back my smile, yes, but you also brought back my hope and my joy and my ability to believe in good things. Thomas will always have a piece of my heart, and you have never asked me to give that up. But the rest of my heart, the largest part, belongs completely to you. I have never regretted loving you, not for a single moment." Harrison's eyes were wet with emotion as he pulled her close and kissed her there on the waterfront with the gulls crying overhead and the smell of salt air surrounding them. "I love you so much," he said against her lips, "more than I have words to express." "Then show me," Hannah replied with a smile that held both tenderness and invitation. They hurried back to their hotel, laughing like young lovers instead of a middle-aged married couple, and spent the night proving that passion did not diminish with time. It only grew richer and more meaningful. When they returned to Wilcox, they found everything running smoothly under Henry's management. Their son had discovered a talent for business that exceeded even their expectations, and he presented them with ideas for expanding the store that were both practical and innovative. Harrison and Hannah exchanged proud glances, recognizing that their children were becoming remarkable adults in their own right. Hope, now 17, had attracted the attention of several young men in town, but she seemed more interested in her art than in courting. She had dreams of traveling east to study painting, an ambition that both worried and impressed her parents. They had always encouraged their children to pursue their passions, but the idea of Hope leaving Wilcox to venture into the wider world was bittersweet. Samuel, at 8 years old, was the wild card of the family. He had inherited his father's love of horses and the outdoors, spending every free moment at the small ranch they had built up over the years. He could ride better than most grown men, and had a natural way with animals that suggested he would grow up to be a rancher rather than a shopkeeper. As 1905 dawned, bringing with it the promise of a new year and new opportunities, Hannah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She was 45 years old now, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines etched into her face by sun and laughter. Her hands were worn from work, her body softer than it had been in youth. But she had never felt more beautiful because she was happy. Genuinely, deeply, lastingly happy. She thought about the woman she had been at 24, hollowed out by grief and unable to imagine a future. That Hannah could never have envisioned this life, this fullness, this joy. If someone had told her then that a cowboy with patient eyes and a kind heart would slowly, steadily, bring her back to life, she might not have believed them. But here she was, living proof that healing was possible, that love could bloom even in the harshest conditions. One spring evening, the whole family gathered for dinner as they did every Sunday. The table was crowded and loud, with conversation flowing over each other and laughter punctuating the meal. Hannah sat at one end with Harrison at the other, their children and the various friends and neighbors they had invited filling the spaces between. She looked around at all these faces, these people she loved and who loved her, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. Henry was telling a story about a difficult customer at the store, acting out the various parts with theatrical flair. Hope was sketching on a piece of paper even while eating, unable to stop her creative impulses. Samuel was trying to convince his father to let him enter a horse race that summer, making his case with earnest determination. The noise and energy should have been overwhelming, but instead it was beautiful. Harrison caught Hannah's eye across the table and winked at her. She smiled back, that full, radiant smile that he had worked so hard to restore all those years ago. In that moment, a silent conversation passed between them, an acknowledgement of everything they had built and everything they meant to each other. After dinner, after the dishes were cleaned and the guests had gone home and the children had retired to their rooms, Harrison and Hannah walked out to the porch as was their custom. The desert night was cool and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They sat in the rocking chairs Harrison had made when they first moved into this house, chairs that had been occupied thousands of times over the years for conversations and companionable silences. "You remember that first day you came into the store?" Hannah asked, breaking the peaceful quiet. "When you bought those peppermint sticks," Harrison chuckled. "I was so nervous. I had been working up the courage for days to actually talk to you. I think I rehearsed what I was going to say about 100 times." "You were sweet," Hannah said, "and persistent. Even when I tried to push you away, you kept coming back." "I saw something worth fighting for," Harrison replied simply. "A woman who deserved to smile again. I just wanted to be the one to make that happen." Hannah reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You succeeded. You know that, right? You brought back my smile, but you gave me so much more than that. You gave me a reason to live instead of just existing. You gave me this family, this home, this beautiful life. You saved me, Harrison." "We saved each other," Harrison corrected, echoing words Hannah had spoken years before. "I was drifting before I met you, never connecting with anyone or anything. You gave me purpose and love and a place to belong. We built this together, Hannah. Every bit of it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the desert. Inside the house, they could hear the faint sounds of their children getting ready for bed, the familiar rhythms of their family life. This was home. This was happiness. This was what they had fought for and built together over more than 2 decades. As 1906 progressed, life continued its steady forward march. Henry began courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch, a smart and capable girl named Rebecca, who impressed both Harrison and Hannah with her practical nature and kind heart. Hope received a letter of acceptance from an art school in Boston, prompting both celebration and bittersweet tears as the family prepared for her departure. Samuel turned 9 and finally convinced his father to let him enter that horse race, which he won handily to everyone's delight and no one's surprise. The store continued to thrive under the family's management, and Harrison and Hannah found themselves in the comfortable position of being able to afford some luxuries they had never imagined in their early days together. They traveled occasionally, though never as far as that trip to San Francisco, taking in the changing landscape of the Southwest as it transitioned from frontier to settled territory. They added to their ranch holdings, building up a herd of quality horses that Samuel would one day inherit and manage. But more than any material success, what gave them the greatest satisfaction was the love that continued to grow between them. They still held hands when they walked through town. They still stole kisses in quiet moments when the children were not watching. They still made love with passion and tenderness, their bodies knowing each other so intimately that words were often unnecessary. After all these years, Harrison could still make Hannah's heart race with a particular look or smile. After all these years, Hannah could still take Harrison's breath away when she laughed or pushed her hair back from her face. In the fall of 1907, Henry married Rebecca in a beautiful ceremony that had Hannah crying tears of joy throughout. Seeing her son so happy, so clearly in love, felt like confirmation that she and Harrison had done right by their children. They had modeled what a good marriage looked like, shown their kids that love and respect and partnership were the foundations of a strong relationship. Hope left for Boston shortly after the wedding, her bags packed with art supplies and her head full of dreams. Hannah cried as she hugged her daughter goodbye at the train station, but they were bittersweet tears. She was sad to see Hope go, but proud that her daughter was brave enough to chase her ambitions. Harrison stood beside her, his arm around her waist, providing silent support as they watched the train pull away. "She will be fine," Harrison murmured. "She has your strength and determination." "And your courage," Hannah replied, leaning into him. "She gets that from you." They went home to a quieter house, with only Samuel still under their roof. It was an adjustment after years of managing a full household, but it also allowed them to rediscover each other in new ways. They took long rides together across their land, exploring areas they had not visited in years. They experimented with new recipes in the kitchen, Hannah teaching Harrison some of her baking secrets. They played cards in the evening and read books aloud to each other, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company without the constant demands of young children. On Christmas of 1907, the family gathered again, now including Rebecca as Henry's wife. Hope sent a package from Boston filled with sketches and paintings she had created, proof that she was thriving in her new environment. The holiday was joyful and loud, filled with good food and laughter, and the warmth of family bonds. As Hannah watched Harrison playing with Samuel, building an elaborate wooden fort that her youngest son had requested as a gift, she felt that familiar surge of love and gratitude that had become such a constant part of her life. This man, this wonderful man, had taken on a broken widow and helped her become whole again. He had never asked her to forget her past or pretend Thomas had not existed. Instead, he had honored her grief while gently leading her toward hope. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Hannah stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom. She studied her reflection, this woman who had lived through so much pain and found her way to joy on the other side. The locket hung around her neck as always, containing the two men who had loved her. She touched it gently, then looked up at Harrison's reflection as he came to stand behind her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "About how different my life is from what I thought it would be," Hannah said softly. "I planned to grow old with Thomas, raise a family with him, run the store together. When he died, I thought all of that died with him. But you showed me that life could surprise me, that there was still beauty and love waiting if I was brave enough to reach for it." Harrison tightened his embrace. "You were always brave, Hannah. Even in your darkest moments, there was a core of strength in you. I just helped you remember it was there." Hannah turned in his arms to face him directly. "I want you to know something. If I had to choose my life over again, if I could go back and change things, I would not even to prevent losing Thomas. Because everything I went through, all the pain and grief and struggle, it led me to you. It made me who I am and it brought us together. I would not trade what we have for anything in the world." Harrison's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I love you, Hannah Vaughn. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Hannah replied, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for bringing back my smile." They stood there in their bedroom, holding each other close. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting and true. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, the same stars that had shone on all their triumphs and struggles over the years. The same stars that would continue shining long after they were gone, witnesses to the love story that had transformed a grieving widow into a happy wife and mother. The years continued to flow by with the relentless forward motion of time. Samuel grew into a capable young man with a gift for ranching that made his parents wonder if he had been born in the wrong era, more suited to the wild days of the frontier than the increasingly civilized territory they now inhabited. He took over the horse breeding operation completely by the time he was 17, expanding it beyond anything Harrison had originally envisioned. Hope returned from Boston in the summer of 1910, having completed her studies and gained recognition for her artistic talent. She brought with her a portfolio of work that was stunning in its depth and technical skill, paintings that captured the essence of the Southwest, with a perspective sharpened by her time away. But more importantly, she brought a young man named Daniel, a fellow artist who looked at her the way Harrison still looked at Hannah after nearly 30 years together. Henry and Rebecca presented Hannah and Harrison with their first grandchild in early 1911, a baby girl they named Clara. The moment Hannah held that tiny bundle, looking down into a face that somehow combined features from both her and Thomas's families, she felt the circle of life closing in the most beautiful way. She was a grandmother now, part of a continuing legacy that would outlast her own time on Earth. As Hannah approached her 51st birthday in 1911, she found herself in a reflective mood. She had lived 30 years since Thomas's death, more time as a widow and then Harrison's wife than she had lived with her first husband. The grief that had once defined her had transformed into a gentle melancholy that she carried alongside her joy. The two emotions no longer in conflict, but rather complementary aspects of a full life. One afternoon, she visited Thomas's grave as she still did regularly, bringing fresh flowers and tidying the area around the headstone. She knelt there in the Arizona heat, the sun beating down on her back, and spoke to him in her mind the way she always did. "I am a grandmother now," she told him silently. "Can you believe it? Henry has a daughter. She is beautiful, Thomas, with dark eyes and the sweetest smile. I wish you could see her. I wish you could have seen all of it, our son growing up, the life I have built. But I think somehow you know. I think you are watching over us all." She paused, touching the warm stone of the marker. "I want you to know that I never forgot you. Even when I fell in love with Harrison, even when I built a new life, you were always part of me. But I also want you to know that I am happy. Truly, deeply happy. Harrison gave me that, and I am grateful for every day we have together. I hope wherever you are at peace. I hope you know that your death was not in vain, that I went on to live a full and beautiful life because of the love you showed me first." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, and looked up at the blue sky overhead. A hawk circled lazily on thermal currents, free and graceful. Hannah took it as a sign, a message that all was well, that the dead did not begrudge the living their happiness. When she returned home, she found Harrison on the porch with baby Clara in his arms, rocking her gently while humming an old tune. The sight made Hannah's heart swell with love. This man had given her everything, rebuilt her from the inside out, and never once made her feel guilty for her lingering connection to Thomas. "She is asleep," Harrison whispered as Hannah climbed the steps. "I think I could sit here holding her all day." Hannah settled into the rocking chair beside him, watching her husband cradle their granddaughter with infinite gentleness. "You are going to spoil her," she said fondly. "That is a grandfather's prerogative," Harrison replied with a smile. "Besides, you are going to spoil her just as much as I am." Hannah laughed softly because he was absolutely right. They sat together in companionable silence, rocking in rhythm, the three of them forming a peaceful tableau of family and love. This, Hannah thought, was what it meant to have a life well lived. Not the absence of pain or loss, but the ability to move through those things and find joy on the other side. As 1912 approached, Arizona finally achieved statehood, joining the Union as the 48th state. The celebration in Wilcox was tremendous, with parades and speeches and a general sense of pride that they were part of something larger. Harrison and Hannah stood with their family watching the festivities, Samuel on one side and Henry, Rebecca, and Clara on the other, with Hope and Daniel nearby sketching the scenes for a series of paintings Hope planned to create. "We have seen a lot of changes," Harrison commented, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "This territory has grown up around us." "But some things stay the same," Hannah replied, looking up at him with that smile he had worked so hard to bring back all those years ago. "Love, family, the things that matter most, those do not change." Harrison kissed the top of her head, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their decades together. "No, they do not, and I am grateful for every moment we have had to build this life together." The celebration continued around them, but they were lost in their own moment. Two people who had found each other when they both needed saving and created something beautiful out of shared pain and hope. The sun shone bright over Arizona, warming the desert landscape and the people who called it home. The future stretched ahead full of possibilities, and the past had been honored and integrated into who they had become. Hannah leaned into her husband's embrace and let herself feel the fullness of her contentment. Her smile, the one that had been lost for so long, the one Harrison had made it his mission to bring back, was now a permanent part of her expression. It came easily and often, sparked by her grandchild's laughter or her husband's touch, or simply the beauty of a desert sunset. The sorrow that had defined her for 3 long years had not disappeared completely, but it had been absorbed into the larger tapestry of her life, adding depth and meaning without overwhelming everything else. In the years that followed, the family continued to grow and evolve. Samuel married a rancher's daughter in 1914, a strong, capable woman named Alice who could ride and rope as well as any man. They took over the horse breeding operation completely, building it into one of the most respected in the state. Hope and Daniel moved back to Wilcox in 1915, establishing an art studio that attracted students from across the Southwest. Henry expanded the general store, adding a post office and lending library that made it the true heart of the community. Hannah and Harrison gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations of their various enterprises, content to advise and support rather than manage directly. They spent their time traveling between their children's homes, doting on grandchildren, and enjoying the quieter pace of their later years. They took long walks together in the mornings when the air was cool, their hands clasped, and their conversation flowing easily after so many decades of partnership. On their 30th anniversary in 1913, their children threw them a grand party that seemed to include everyone in Wilcox and beyond. The celebration was held at the ranch Samuel now managed, with long tables set up outside and music provided by a band brought in from Tucson. As the sun set and lanterns were lit against the gathering darkness, Harrison stood and clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. "I am not much for speeches," he began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "But on an occasion like this, I have to say something. 30 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She was broken then, grieving the loss of her first husband and unable to see a path forward. But she had a strength inside her that drew me like a magnet. I made it my mission to bring back her smile, to help her find joy again. What I did not expect was that she would give me so much more in return." He turned to look at Hannah, who sat beside him with tears streaming down her face. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You made me a better man than I ever could have been on my own. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life, and I thank God every day that I rode into Wilcox all those years ago and found you." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Hannah stood and embraced Harrison, holding him tight while their children and grandchildren and friends celebrated around them. When she pulled back to look at him, her face was illuminated with joy and love, and that smile that he had worked so hard to restore. "I love you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for showing me that life could be beautiful again." They danced as the evening wore on, swaying together under the stars while around them younger couples twirled and laughed. Hannah rested her head on Harrison's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, and thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. So much pain, so much growth, so much love. It had all been worth it. As they entered the 1920s, age began to slow them both down. Harrison's hands developed arthritis that made detailed work difficult, though he never complained. Hannah's eyesight dimmed, requiring her to wear spectacles for reading and close work. But they faced these challenges together, as they had faced everything else, with patience and humor and the deep knowledge that they had each other. Their children were all well established, their grandchildren growing into interesting young people with their own dreams and ambitions. The family they had created spread like branches of a strong tree, each person carrying forward the legacy of love and resilience that Hannah and Harrison had modeled. The general store, the ranch, Hope's art studio, all thrived under the next generation's management, proof that what they had built would outlast them. On a cool evening in October of 1923, Harrison and Hannah sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Hannah was now 63 and Harrison 67, both of them worn by years and hard work, but still deeply connected. They held hands, their fingers intertwined with the ease of decades of practice, and watched the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors as it set. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Hannah asked softly. "When you brought me those apples and told me I should bake again," Harrison chuckled, the sound raspy but warm. "I think about it often. I was terrified you were going to throw them in my face. Or worse, burst into tears and never speak to me again." "I almost did both," Hannah admitted. "I was so angry that you were trying to push me out of my comfortable misery, but then I baked those pies and something shifted inside me. It was like you opened a door I thought had been permanently locked." "I just saw someone who deserved to smile again," Harrison said, squeezing her hand gently. "Someone who had so much love to give if she could just find a way past the grief. I am glad I pushed." Hannah turned to look at him, studying the familiar beloved face that had been her companion through so much. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were still the same kind green that had looked at her with such understanding all those years ago. "You did more than help me find my smile," she said. "You gave me back my life. You showed me that it was possible to honor the past while building a future. You never asked me to forget Thomas, never made me choose between my memories and my present. That gift was beyond price." Harrison lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles tenderly. "Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life, Hannah Vaughn. Every single day with you has been a gift." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed their courtship, their marriage, the birth of their children, all the moments that had woven together to create their shared life. The desert night sounds rose around them, familiar and comforting. "Do you have any regrets?" Hannah asked after a while. "Anything you wish had been different?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Only that we did not have more time," he said finally. "But I suppose everyone wishes for that when they are happy. No, I have no real regrets. Everything we went through, good and bad, made us who we are, made this what it is." Hannah nodded, understanding completely. She felt the same way. Even the pain, even the loss had shaped her into someone stronger and more appreciative of joy when it came. If she had not known grief, she might not have recognized happiness for the precious gift it was. They eventually went inside as the night grew cold, retiring to their bedroom where they had shared so many nights over the years. They prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of long partnership, each knowing the other's routines and preferences. When they finally lay down together, Harrison pulled Hannah into his arms as he always did, her back against his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist. "I love you, Hannah," he murmured into her hair. "I always have and I always will." "I love you too," Hannah whispered back. "Thank you for bringing back my smile. Thank you for everything." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls that had found each other and created something beautiful out of shared pain and hope and determination. Outside, the Arizona night stretched endlessly, the stars shining bright over the desert they called home, witnessing the final chapters of a love story that had transformed both their lives. The following years were gentler, quieter, but no less full of love. Harrison and Hannah celebrated each day they had together, knowing that time was precious and not to be wasted. They attended family gatherings, delighted in the antics of their growing number of great-grandchildren, and continued to enjoy each other's company above all else. They would sit for hours just talking or reading, comfortable with silence or conversation in equal measure. In 1928, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The family had grown so large that they had to hold the party at the town hall to accommodate everyone. Harrison made another speech, his voice weaker now but no less heartfelt, thanking Hannah again for the life they had built together. Hannah responded by simply kissing him in front of everyone, to the delight and applause of their assembled family. "That is all that needs to be said," she declared when they parted. "Everything else is just details." As 1929 drew to a close, both Harrison and Hannah knew they were approaching the end of their journey together. Harrison's heart had grown weak, his breathing often labored. Hannah's own body was failing in small ways, her joints aching and her energy limited. But they faced this final challenge as they had faced everything else, together and with grace. On a warm evening in December, with their children gathered around them, Harrison took his last breath with Hannah's hand clasped in his. He died as he had lived, peacefully and surrounded by love. Hannah sat beside him, tears streaming down her face but a smile on her lips, because she knew that he had lived a full and happy life. He had accomplished what he set out to do all those years ago, bringing back her smile and helping her heal, and in doing so he had found his own happiness. "Thank you," she whispered to him one last time. "Thank you for loving me. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for 47 years of joy." Hannah lived for 2 more years after Harrison's death, long enough to see Samuel's youngest son graduate from college and Hope's art featured in a prestigious gallery in New York. She spent her final years sharing stories with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, making sure they understood the legacy of love and resilience they came from. She talked often about both Thomas and Harrison, honoring both men who had loved her and shaped her life. When Hannah passed away peacefully in her sleep in early 1931 at the age of 71, she was buried between Thomas and Harrison in the Wilcox Cemetery, the three headstones forming a line. It was her children who arranged it that way, understanding that their mother's heart had been big enough to hold love for both men, that her life had been enriched by both relationships. The story of Harrison and Hannah became part of Wilcox's history, a tale told to illustrate the power of love and patience and the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds. People would visit their graves, seeing the dates and doing the math, understanding the story those stones told. A young widow consumed by grief, a cowboy who made it his mission to bring back her smile, a love story that proved it was possible to honor the past while building a beautiful future. Their descendants flourished, carrying forward the lessons of resilience and love that Harrison and Hannah had modeled. The general store remained in the family for generations, a testament to the business they had built together. The horse ranch Samuel founded became one of the most respected in Arizona. Hope's art was eventually displayed in museums, preserving her vision of the Southwest for future generations. But more than any material legacy, what Harrison and Hannah left behind was proof that the human spirit could endure terrible loss and still find joy again. That love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. That a smile, once lost to sorrow, could be brought back through patience and care and the determination of someone who refused to give up. In the end, Harrison had succeeded in his mission completely. He had brought back Hannah's smile, and in doing so, he had given both of them a life richer and more beautiful than either could have imagined. Their love story became legend, a reminder that even in the harsh landscape of the Old West, even amid violence and loss and hardship, love could not only survive but thrive. And that sometimes, the greatest act of love was helping someone remember how to smile again.